take leaders' questions under Standing Order 27, and I call Deputy Micheál Martin.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Tanaiste, the conclusion of the Smithwick Tribunal that unidentified members of An Garda Síochána colluded with the Provisional IRA in the murder of RUC officers Harry Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan is truly shocking and sickening. It represents a terrible betrayal of the thousands of members of An Garda Síochána who down through the years made many sacrifices to protect the citizens of this island, north and south, and who worked extremely hard against the actions of the Provisional IRA and other terrorist groups. It betrays that sacrifice in a profound and disgusting way. I want to welcome, Tanaiste, the apology issued by you on behalf of all of us and on behalf of the state, and indeed issued by the Minister for Justice, Alan Shatter. Officers Buchanan and Breen were carrying out their professional duties to protect the citizens of this state in cooperation with An Garda Síochána, and they were gunned down savagely in the course of doing their duty. And those who gunned them down should have been brought to justice and should be brought to justice. And the report should be sent to the DPP, and every opportunity or prospect of further criminal investigation should be examined. And those in possession of vital information, I would put it to you, Tanaiste, should provide that information, because it's clear that it wasn't fully provided to the tribunal judge. Statements were issued or sent by the IRA to the tribunal, and I would invite people and members of the House to read that statement. It provides a very chilling account of the cold and callous manner in which the murders took place. But clearly, information that could have been provided by people in the provisional movement was not provided by people in the provisional movement. I think the publication of the report vindicates the establishment of the inquiry in the first instance, but also perhaps highlights now the need for the other aspects and dimensions of the Western Park Agreement, particularly the inquiry into Finucane, Hamel and Nelson and others, and Dublin Monaghan bombing should now be pursued vigorously by our government with the British government, because ultimately the truth wins out, and this conclusion is important for the families and for the overall situation in terms of our examination of the difficulties in this island. I also want to ask you, Tanaiste, if you will facilitate a full debate in this House on the tribunal report. A debate, Tanaiste, that might avoid the incredible kind of statements that we've witnessed already this morning on News Talk from the leader of the Sinn Féin party, for example, who incredibly said that the two officers displayed a laissez-faire disregard for their own security. And I just want to quote what was said, if I may, Tanaiste. So when you have that type of laissez-faire disregard for their own security by both An Garda Síochána in relation to these two RUC officers, and more importantly by the RUC officers themselves, here they were in the heart of South Armagh, in the middle of a very severe conflict at that time, and seemed to think that they were immune to attack by the IRA. And tragically, as it turned out, for them that wasn't the case. Unquote. Thank you, Deputy. Now that's the leader of Sinn Féin's contribution to this debate. I think it's insulting to the families concerned. It should be withdrawn. And I think it also essentially almost blames, by implication, by the officers themselves. I mean, we should be very clear in this House. This was premeditated murder, carried out by so-called Republicans, people supported by the Sinn Féin leader and others, and who continue to refuse to accept the reality that it was a premeditated murder. And I think, from our perspective, Deputy Adams should apologise to the families on behalf of that so-called Republican movement, because I think this kind of language in Sinn Féin speak that we're now becoming accustomed to, in my view, represents their ongoing widgery approach to whitewashing their past atrocities. And we need a full debate here in the House to hammer these points home in an unequivocal manner.
Ceann Comhairle, the central grave finding of the Smithwick Tribunal report is that there was collusion within An Garda Síochána and the IRA in the murders of Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and Superintendent Robert Buchanan. I am appalled and saddened by this finding, as I know all in this House will be. The Government apologised immediately on publication of Judge Smithwick's report. However, I wish to place that apology on the record of this House. On behalf of the Government and the people of Ireland, I apologise without reservation to the Breen and Buchanan families for any failings identified in the report on the part of the State or any of its agencies. I am truly sorry for the loss and suffering that both families have endured. I want to acknowledge the dignified manner in which the Breen and Buchanan families have responded to publication of the report, and I wish to join them in thanking Judge Peter Smithwick for producing such an open, honest and comprehensive report. Out of respect for the families, we should recall the human dimension of this atrocity. Judge Peter Corey, in his report in 2003, described Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan as two outstanding RUC officers. Chief Superintendent Breen was a deeply caring family man, devoted to his wife June and their two children, Gillian and David. Superintendent Buchanan was known as a man of absolute integrity and as a proud, dedicated and able police officer and a loving husband of Catherine and caring father of their two children, Heather and William. When they were murdered by the IRA on the Edenappa Road near Jonesborough on the 20th of March 1989, June and Catherine were each deprived of a loving husband and partner. Gillian, David, Heather and William each lost their father, and nothing can undo that. Over 3,500 men, women and children died during the Troubles. There is no hierarchy of suffering or grief. But where allegations of collusion by agents of the state were concerned, we have long agreed that the state bears a particular and solemn responsibility. I have said previously that I don't believe we can address the past constructively unless we are each prepared to ask questions of ourselves and of our own role, and I believe we have done that today. I know that members of An Garda Síochána will view actions as documented in the report as a betrayal of the values that they uphold and of the very ethos of the Garda Síochána as the guardians of the peace. They will be thinking today of the sacrifices that they and their predecessors made in performing their duty during the Troubles. I think today of the Gardaí who gave their lives, the Gardaí who were injured, the Gardaí who put themselves at risk in doing their duty on behalf of the people during the Troubles. The depth and the quality of cross-border cooperation today between the PSNI and the Garda Síochána is second to none, and I wish to give both forces credit for that. My colleague, the Minister for Justice and Equality, Alan Shatter, will be meeting with his counterpart in the Northern Executive, David Ford, along with the Chief Constable of the PSNI, Matt Baggett, and the Garda Commissioner, Martin Callanan, shortly to discuss the report. This House, the Oireachtas, has been consistent and unflinching in its demand for and pursuit of the truth in relation to the allegations of collusion identified by the British and Irish governments at Weston Park in 2001. The Irish and British governments then accepted that certain cases from the past gave rise to serious allegations of collusion by the security forces in each of our jurisdictions and remained a source of grave public concern. The governments are committed to undertake a thorough investigation of allegations of collusion in the cases of the murders of Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan, Pat Finucane, Lord Justice and Lady Gibson, Robert Hamill, Rosemary Nelson and Billy Wright. Arising from the Weston Park Agreement, Mr. Peter Corey, an eminent retired Canadian Supreme Court judge, was asked by the two governments to investigate and report on the allegations of collusion. In line with Judge Corey's recommendations to the Irish government, a tribunal of inquiry was established by the Houses of the Oireachtas in 2005 into the murders of Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan. That independent tribunal of inquiry has now concluded its work, and Judge Peter Smithwick has submitted his report to this House. Whilst Judge Smithwick does not find direct evidence of collusion in the killings, he concludes, on the balance of probabilities, that collusion did occur involving an unidentified member or members of An Garda Síochána. I wish again to thank Judge Smithwick for his work. This is a report to the House, and yes, I do agree that we should find and make time available to have the report discussed here in the House, and I will ask the Government Chief Whip to make the necessary arrangements with the whips of the opposition parties.
Tanaiste, supplementary question from Deputy Mayor
I want to thank Tanaiste for his very comprehensive response, and I would agree entirely with the sentiments articulated in that statement. And I thank him for his reply and the clarity of it. In relation to the vindication and the origins of the establishment of the Smithwick inquiry, which has proved, I think, to be effective and has come to a conclusion that, as I have said, is both shocking, sickening and a betrayal of the many, many members of the Garda Síochána who made such sacrifices in the fight against terrorism and the IRA. But I think it also illustrates the value of the conclusions of the Weston Park Agreement and the value of such inquiries, long as they may be, difficult as they may be, but in shining a light on appalling atrocities such as this. And that is why I think it's equally important that the other aspects of Weston Park, particularly the Finucane case, is addressed in the same comprehensive manner as the Smithwick Tribunal was. In other words, a tribunal or an investigation comparable to the terms of reference of the Smithwick Tribunal is warranted for those other allegations of collusion. And there has been some significant forestalling on that on behalf of the British government, which I think we should, given the clarity of the conclusions here, or the importance of the conclusion, it does clearly underline the importance of exercises such as this in going further than official investigations did in terms of bringing the truth to people. I think that's extremely important.
Thank you.
I welcome your commitment to a debate, because I do genuinely think it's extremely important that we avoid all sorts of language that endeavours to throw mud in the way of clarity in terms of what actually happened here. It was a cold-blooded, premeditated murder which struck at the heart of those who were upholding the security of our citizens north and south. That's in essence what we're looking at here. The fact that there was collusion involved is doubly shocking, I think, to many citizens across the state and to the vast majority, of course, of the members of An Garda Síochána.
Margaret Tanaiste.
Well, first of all, I do acknowledge and agree about the importance of the Weston Park Agreement. The Weston Park Agreement 2001 identified a number of cases where there was serious concern, where there were serious allegations of collusion by agents of the state, by security forces in both jurisdictions. And it clearly determined that those cases had to be examined. The particular case that we had to examine in this jurisdiction was the murder of Chief Superintendent Breen and Superintendent Buchanan, and that's why the Smithwick Tribunal was established by the House. There was a decision of the House to establish that in 2005. It has taken a long time, and again I want to thank Judge Smithwick for the work that he has done in relation to it. But I think it also does show that we need to see completion of all of the work that was committed to at Weston Park. I have already communicated previously to my counterpart in the UK administration the wish of the government, and not just the government, but the wish unanimously of this House to see an inquiry into the Pat Finucane case. I've met with Geraldine Finucane, her family, and discussed that issue with her, and we will continue to pursue the Finucane case. I think the fact that the Smithwick Tribunal has now concluded will, if anything, I think, strengthen our position in relation to that. There is, of course, then the wider issue of dealing with the past, and again, in respect of that, the government supports the all-party discussions, cross-party discussions, which are established in Northern Ireland, being chaired by Dr. Richard Haas. Dr. Haas has stated his intention to complete his work by the end of the year. I will be meeting with him next week. And we'll be discussing the progress that he has made to date, and no doubt I will be discussing with him the outcome of the Smithwick report. And probably by then, depending on when we make the arrangements for the debate in the House, I may well have the benefit of the discussion in the House to inform my discussions with Dr. Haas.
Mark Tanaiste, I now call Deputy Jerry Adams.
Last conclusion. Tanaiste, I want to very much thank you for committing to having a debate on this issue, but also to remind you that I've called for some time for a wider debate upon the past and upon issues pertaining to the North. So I look forward to that debate. And I want to commend the Government also for fulfilling your commitment made at Weston Park to hold an inquiry into the killing of these two RUC officers. And I want to commend Justice Smithwick. I cooperated with the Justice and his staff. I want to commend them for their diligence and hard work over 8 years to produce this report. I am very mindful, I don't need reminders from the Fianna Fáil leader, but at the heart of this tribunal are two bereaved families. I've already said clearly that these were brave officers doing their duty as they saw it, in the same way as the IRA volunteers would see themselves as doing their duty as they saw it. Please let me finish. And I would remind all Choctaw here that
Deputy Byrne.
That all last concord. I'd remind all Choctaw here that all the main parties here came from that period of armed resistance that led to the armed proclamation of a republic in 1916, and some people here have really very, very short memories about their own role and the role of organisations that they may have belonged to in the past. Now, what I said on Newsweek, for the record, reflects the Smithwick report, reflects the statement given to the Smithwick report by the RUC and by Garda Síochána, and also by the former IRA volunteers. So we can return to that at another time. Ní ró cogu mai riomháin, sin an oireanne, agus ní séán dana an, sin an oireanne fásta, agus támuid an seo arís le séán agus támuid buíochas le an áit níos fearr ná a bhíimiid. Some people want to keep fighting the war. You know, some people who stood idly by and abandoned the people of the North want to keep fighting the war for very, very petty, opportunistic political advantage. But I do want to bring to your attention, Tanaiste, one clear contradiction in the Smithwick's conclusions. On the one hand, Justice Smithwick says, and this is a very clear, unambiguous assertion, that the tribunal has not uncovered direct evidence of collusion. That's clear. He then goes on, and what I think is a contradiction, on the basis of untested intelligence and circumstantial statements, to accept on the balance of probability some form of collusion occurred involving unidentified Garda or Gardaí. Which brings us all back to Weston Park. Because what Justice Smithwick defines as collusion is very different in form and scale from that which occurred as a matter of policy between British agencies and their allies and unionist paramilitaries. Because the British state, everybody here knows this, was involved in structured, administrative, institutionalised collusion, and that includes the Dublin Monaghan bombing. And the British government is in arrogant disregard of the unanimous all-party Oireachtas motion calling on it to provide fatal information about these bomb attacks. And Fianna Fáil, when they were in government, and remember Fianna Fáil was in government for 60 years here, has failed to get the British government to honour its obligations.
Thank you, Deputy.
So it's important to remember, as you said, there's no hierarchy of victims. There are many other families seeking truth, seeking closure. So will the Irish government now, as a matter of priority, increase its lobby, enlist and mobilise our international and diplomatic resources to get the British government to honour its commitments and to establish the promised public inquiry into the murder of Pat?
Thank you, Deputy. Tanaiste.
I think it's important, Lascan Corla, that we reflect on what's important today. This report is just published. I think what's important today, first of all, is that we think of the two families who lost father, lost a husband, that we think of their colleagues in the then RUC and PSNI who lost colleagues. That we think also, I think, of the trauma that I have no doubt that this report will cause to members of the Garda Síochána. I think we can be very proud in this country of the integrity, of the courage and of the service that we get from the Garda Síochána. And I think it will be very troubling for them today, as it is for me and I think for other members of this House, to find in an official report that there was collusion between some individual members of the Garda Síochána and the IRA, which in this case led to the murder in very savage circumstances of these two men. I can't get out of my mind the image of one of those men, injured, out of his car, waving his white handkerchief and being shot in the head by an IRA activist. That's what we're dealing with here. Today isn't a day for self-justification by anybody, political party. It's not a day for muddying the waters. It's not a day for pulling this report apart or finding a flaw in it. It's not a day either for, you know, the writing of history or the rewriting of history. Cibé sort coga bhíán a hata, a móhuram héin, bachavlint, sórach, shetrach a bhíán. Agus tá ásarum go bhfuil deireadh leis, agus an gnó ba cheart a bheith idir lámh aganis sa teach seo na fécinta rai ar an Síocháin agus ar na léitheanta atá amach rói. I think what we have to do, as I said, is I think we have to reflect on this report. It's a very serious report. I think we have to look at what we need to do in the future in relation to the unfinished business of Weston Park. I want everybody in this House to be assured that this government will continue to use every effort to ensure that the Weston Park process and the agreements that were signed up to in Weston Park are fully complied with and fully completed. And if anything, I think that the reports that we have now will provide us with an opportunity to do that.
Come on, Chuck the Jerry Adams. Supplementary.
Tanaiste, I agree with everything you've said, Tanaiste. I also would remind you that Weston Park was in 2001. So for 12 years, the British government have been in breach of the agreement that they made at this time. You see, and if we're going to look at the past, let's be very, very clear about this. Yes, what happened when those two officers was killed was horrible, was horrific, and as I said in Gaeilge, there's no such thing as a good war. So what happened to Kilmackle was the same. What happened in the streets of this city was the same. What happened in terms of creating this parliament was the same. There's no way that you can just draw a line and say, well, there was a good old IRA back in the day throwing powder puffs at the British. And then there's an IRA which has departed the stage, which behaved in a more cruel way. This is the man from Del Monte, you know. Jeepers.
Deputy Adams has the floor, please. No, look at this is leaders' questions, Deputy Byrne.
I would say, with all deference, John Cody, of all the people who could get up here and rant at me, Choctaw Eric Byrne is not one to do that. No, not one to do that. So, right. If we're going to look at this, and here we get into the recriminations, let's look at Aldershot, Tanaiste. Let's look at Ranger Best. Let's look at the killing of Larry White and of Seamus Costello. This is the sort of narrative we get into when there is not a serious effort made to understand that I am articulating a viewpoint. You might disagree with me, you might think I'm totally and absolutely wrong, but it's an entirely legitimate viewpoint. I cooperated with the Smithwick inquiry. I used whatever influence I could to ensure that there was an unprecedented attendance in terms of former IRA volunteers speaking to the tribunal, speaking to the justice on more than one occasion. And why was that? Why was that? Was that to score some cheap point against Fianna Fáil? No, that wasn't. That's because the war is over. It's done. It's dusted. We now have to build the peace. And building the peace means trying to bring closure to families, including the Breen and Buchanan families. And building the peace also means ensuring that the past does not become an obstacle to the future. That's key to all of this, that we do this in as therapeutic a way as possible. Of course, there are hard questions to be answered, and of course, people need to come up to the plate in terms of dealing with all of these matters. So I look very much forward to the debate, and hopefully it'll be eventually done in a reasoned and rational way, as I asked the Taoiseach a few weeks ago. But I also want to ask you, Tanaiste, and we've spoken about this many times, Sinn Féin have been proposing that an international agency be brought in, that it facilitates a truth recovery process which is victim-centred and which looks at all of these matters. The Irish government clearly couldn't set that up. The British government couldn't set it up. Republicans or unionists couldn't set it up. So would the government at least explore the possibility, as opposed to the drip-feed trauma created every time there's an inquiry or an inquest or a tribunal, that we deal with all of this as best we can by bringing in an independent international dimension to it. We wouldn't be where we are in the peace process. Richard Haas is an international diplomat. We wouldn't be where we are going through the whole history of this peace process if we didn't bring in the international community to help us. And here's another case that's crying out for such an approach.
Thank you,
we clearly wouldn't be in the peace process that we're in if we had relied upon successive Irish governments, including that led by the party on my left.
Well, I think, first of all, I think it is important that we again come back to the core of this question. A report has just been published following an inquiry that was undertaken for 8 years. It's a very extensive report. It goes through a significant amount of evidence and it reports on it. And it concludes that there was collusion between some members of the Garda Síochána and the IRA, which led to the killing of 2 police officers on their way back from a meeting in Dundalk. Now, by any standards, that's a serious matter. It's serious at a number of levels. It's serious, obviously, for the individuals who lost their lives, but it is also serious for our police service, the police service of a democratic state, that at this particular point in time, for whatever reason, or with whatever motivation, or with whatever persuasion or maybe pressure, that some officers of the Garda Síochána colluded with the IRA to kill 2 police officers from Northern Ireland going back from a meeting in a Garda station in Dundalk. That is an issue that, as a democratic state, we have to address, and I hope that we will address it when we come to debate it more fully here in the House. But we also have to address it because of the impact that I believe that will have on the Garda Síochána itself. As I said, an outstanding force, do a great job, and who will be traumatised and who will think today, as they come to terms with this report, of the sacrifices that so many members of the Garda Síochána may have. There are times when we can debate and discuss episodes in the history of this island, when maybe the issue of equivalence that you refer to, you may present your point of view on it. To be honest, Deputy, I don't think today is the day to do that. And I don't think that you do yourself, your party, and with the greatest of respect, Deputy Adams, I don't think you do the peace process any service today by saying what you have said. In relation to the proposal that Sinn Féin has for dealing with the past, there is now a process which is underway, the Haas process. I think we should all participate in that. I think, and you know this because I have discussed this directly with you in meetings that I've had with you in your capacity as leader of Sinn Féin. I believe that Sinn Féin should engage fully, as I know you are engaging, yes, in the Haas process, as the government will engage with it. We do need to deal with the past. It does need to be dealt with comprehensively. I think we should see through the Haas process. I think there are a number of ways which have been put forward as to how that might be dealt with, and I think we should all engage conclusively with that, because I think the important thing is, while we have to deal with the past, we do have to deal with the past, I think that we should not lose sight of what it is we're about here, and that is about building a better future for all of the people on this island, north and south, dealing with the very difficult legacy that we have from the past, enabling victims in particular. And when we talk about victim-centred, let's not forget that the people who I believe are at the centre of the issue that we're discussing here right now, in my opinion, are the Breen and Buchanan families who suffered such a grave loss. I believe that we should have a process that is victim-centred, and I hope that arising from the Haas process and the cross-party talks that are now taking place, that we will be able to emerge with that.
Well, now for the technical group, Deputy Stephen Donnelly.
Thank
2 minutes.
Last Ken Corla. Tanaiste, as you know, Bank of Ireland today announced a plan to sell or return to the state €1.8 billion. And this is welcome, and I hope that you and your government put the money to good use. However, I think as we get ready to take this money back from Bank of Ireland, we need to be very cognizant as to where some of it has come from. Because some of it has come from citizens whose lives have been ruined by the behaviour of Bank of Ireland. Tanaiste, of the banks that have appeared before the Finance Committee, Bank of Ireland is unique in refusing to offer 0% on the portion of a mortgage in distress that is shelved. It's the only bank that has refused to do it. At the same Finance Committee meeting, Tanaiste, in September, I went through with the Chief Executive the so-called restructures that Bank of Ireland was offering. We went through 90% of them, and he agreed on the record that in all of those cases, the borrowers would end up paying more money back to Bank of Ireland, in at least 90%, and I believe probably closer to 100%. So for borrowers and families whose problem is they've got too much debt, Bank of Ireland's solution is for those families to pay Bank of Ireland more money than they would have had they not got into trouble. And Tanaiste, when I talk to practitioners who are working very hard every day to try and help families and individuals restructure their mortgages, I often ask them, is there any one bank that you would say is doing everything it can not to act according to the spirit of what the government has asked for? And I hear the same thing every time. Bank of Ireland, Bank of Ireland, Bank of Ireland. Tanaiste, right now, families all over Ireland with unsustainable debts are in a banking lottery. And those who were unfortunate enough to do business with Bank of Ireland and to trust Bank of Ireland during the bubble are families who are being squeezed harder than families who did business with other banks. Now, the Irish people, as you know, Tanaiste, made a lot of money available to Bank of Ireland, and €1.8 billion of this was to deal specifically with residential mortgages. When Bank of Ireland came before us in the Finance Committee, their figures showed that they had made a provision for half of this amount on residential mortgages. In other words, they said, we've got your 1.8 billion, and we're going to use all of this 1.8 billion euro because we acknowledge that we're not going to get back about half the money from distressed mortgages.
Thank you, Deputy.
But rather than act as the government has asked, Tanaiste, Bank of Ireland's explicitly stated policy is that it will not engage in any debt write-down. Practitioners are telling me that Bank of Ireland drag their heels at every opportunity they have. So my question, Tanaiste, is this. Do you believe that it is acceptable for Bank of Ireland to be acting in this way? And if you don't believe it's acceptable, are there tangible measures that your government can take to stop them? Thank you.
Thank you. Tanaiste.
Well, first of all, the Minister for Finance, on behalf of the state, has concluded negotiations on the sale and redemption of preference shares in the Bank of Ireland. This transaction will see that the state will recoup a premium on the initial €1.837 billion investment. A press release was issued this morning to mark the start of the sale process. These sale and redemption processes are currently underway, and the exact return to the state will depend on the outcome of the two separate capital market book build exercises that form part of these processes. As the process is currently underway, I'm limited in what I can say, but I'm sure that when the process is concluded, the Minister will come to the House and update it fully. The process involves the sale of 1.3 billion of the preference shares to private investors, the redemption of 537 million of the preference shares, which will be financed by the bank through the placing of new equity. The successful conclusion of this transaction will see the state exit its 1.837 billion euro of preference shares held in Bank of Ireland at a profit, build further confidence in Ireland's recovery, strengthen our return to normal market funding, and I acknowledge the welcome that Deputy Donnelly has given for that process. In relation to the ongoing engagement between banks and individual borrowers, and particularly families that continue to have mortgage difficulties and continue to need to find a way out of that. The central bank, as you know, has set targets for each of the banks to conclude agreements with families who are in mortgage distress. We have put in place a range of measures, new legislation, personal insolvency service, non-judicial debt settlement arrangement, and we have made it very clear to all of the banks that we want to see a conclusion brought to the mortgage distress and debt difficulties that very many families find themselves in. That has to be done, as I've said repeatedly here, on a case-by-case basis. We continue to engage with the banks, and through the central bank have engagement with them on what they are doing. We will continue to have that engagement with them, because what we want to see done is we want to see families lifted out from beneath the burden of debt. And that's a process that we want to see accelerated. We want to see all of the banks engaged in it, and no individual bank should be holding back or should be engaging in an approach to that that is less than fully engaging.
Supplementary question, Stephen Donnelly.
Thank you for your answer, Tanaiste. Tanaiste, the targets, whilst I think were well meant, are being gamed by all of the banks. We know from the September Finance Committee that the way they've met the targets is they've issued tens of thousands of legal letters offering to evict people from their homes. And the central bank has colluded in this by accepting that a threatening legal letter counts as a genuine offer of a long-term sustainable restructure to the mortgage. But Tanaiste, I very much welcome what you said, where you say no bank should be seen to be holding back, because the reality is one bank, at least, is, and that bank is Bank of Ireland. And the thing is, Tanaiste, Bank of Ireland is not acting irrationally. It is the job of the board and the executive of Bank of Ireland to make them as much money as possible. That's their job. And a bank makes money by taking it in from people, giving them as low an interest rate as possible, lending it out to people, charging as high an interest rate as possible, and then squeezing and squeezing and squeezing as necessary to get that money back. That's the banking model. So I don't blame Bank of Ireland for acting the way they are acting. I wish they would act like the other banks, including the commercial banks, but the reality is they're not. And the executive team of that bank have taken a very clear line, which is on the record at the Finance Committee, where they said, we are not engaging in debt write-down, we are not doing these things, and the practitioners on the street are saying they are dragging their heels. So I welcome the fact that you say no bank should be allowed, because if we have a bank which clearly is dragging its heels and which is publicly stating that it is going to do other than the government's stated intention, which is debt write-down, as stated by Minister Shatter during the debate on the Insolvency Act last year, you have to ask, what are you therefore going to do? So can I ask you, on the basis that you've said no bank should be dragging its heels, and on the basis that we have very solid evidence that says Bank of Ireland is dragging its heels, and the knock-on effect of that is that families all over the country are being squeezed and squeezed in ways they are not if they were fortunate enough to borrow from other banks. What can you tangibly do about it in the coming months and weeks? Thank you.
Tanaiste, final reply.
First of all, you used two phrases, Deputy Donnelly, that registered with me. One is where you describe banks, as you say, acting rationally, and you said that is the banking model. I disagree with you in this respect. I think that was the banking model. That was, if you like, the approach that one would have expected banks acting rationally. But as you know, and as we all know, the banks, when they were acting rationally in that way, found themselves in a position where they ended up having to come to the state for assistance. And therefore, I think we are in a situation where the banks do have, largely because of the commitment that was made to them, the fact that they were bailed out by the state, by taxpayers' money, I believe that the banks have a community, a social responsibility, call it what you will. And I believe that that responsibility is in large part measured, and you gave some of the figures here, by the amounts which were provided for the banks to resolve mortgage distress, and I believe that they should get on and do that. We have set targets through the central bank for the banks to deal with distressed mortgage holders. You asked specifically about what we can do to ensure that that is complied with. We have an engagement at government level through the Minister for Finance and Department of Finance, and on some occasions the Economic Management Council, and certainly through the Central Bank, to continue that engagement with the banks until we see the mortgage distress problem resolved. And of course, there is also the degree of public accountability which is exercised through the Oireachtas Finance Committee. And I want to commend the work of the Finance Committee in bringing the banks before them and ensuring that there is public accountability. Because this isn't just a matter that can be dealt with and discussed behind closed doors somewhere. This is a matter which is of public interest, in which public money has been committed to the banks, and I believe it is right and proper that they appear regularly before the Finance Committee to account publicly for what they are doing.
That concludes leaders'